Hi, hi. Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know who I am, Dr. Maisha. I'm the founder of the Mind ReMapping Company, and I teach the tools of neurolinguistic programming, conscious communication, and emotional intelligence. So, I come on and I do these lives pretty much once a week, um, like clockwork, mostly like clockwork. And there's sometimes there are the things that I plan to talk about, and then there are the things that I end up talking about. And today is one of those weeks that I had planned a different topic, and something happened this week that made me really want to share a little bit about normalizing emotion and why that's so important. And so I'll start by just sharing a little story when this that happened this week with my son. Now, you all know if you listen to me, you follow me, I always talk a little bit about my experiences as a parent with my son, and he's okay with me sharing my lessons, the lessons that I learn, and how he knows the work that I do. So I just want to lead with that. Um, the other day, yesterday actually, um, my I got a text from a fellow parent, and she shared with me that her son had come home and told him that Delson had expressed some big feelings um, to him, and that he was concerned, and he thought that he should tell his mom. And so, I was first of all very grateful that number one, my son felt safe enough to tell someone that he was feeling. And he had some really big feelings of sadness, some really big feelings of loneliness. And he had um, some big thoughts about himself that normally he doesn't have. You know, the not being good enough kind of thoughts, right? And so, it was I felt first of all, grateful that my son felt safe enough to and has a friend close enough that he could share that with. I then felt very grateful that um, his friend felt safe enough that he could share it with his mom and had the awareness to share it with his mom, and that his mom felt was felt the push to share it with me. Now, why do I share this? It's because these this chain of events could not have happened if my son hadn't expressed this, and then it would not have led to the conversation that I had with him. And so what ultimately happened is, I got to have this heart to heart with him about this big emotion that he was having of sadness, and really, with the type of understanding and compassion and openness of listening to be able to hear him um, normalize that these emotions happened, and then get to the root of what it was that had him feeling the kinds of emotions that he was feeling like he wasn't a good, he wasn't a good kid, and because he had made some mistakes around the house, or he's made some mistakes at school, and so, one of the thing and it took a moment for me to what from the time that he told me, and then he said, well, he didn't want to talk about it. And I said, you know what, that's just fine. For me to kind of get for myself, what is the conversation I want to have with my son that can empower him? What is it that I need to do so that he understands the nature of how these emotions comes up, that he understands a bit more about himself, and that he gets that um, emotions are emotions are normal and natural things, and that they're fleeting, and that they're not facts. So, but they are valid. They are valid, right? And so the punchline of the story is, we had this wonderful heart to heart conversation, And it was an emotional conversation for us both, and he was able to, and by the way, my son is 8. He was able to share with me what were the things that had him feeling like he was feeling and thinking the way he was thinking about him not being a good kid. And he's an amazing kid, by the way. And I was able to normalize the thoughts and normalize the emotions for him that had him feel much better, and also let him know that, you know, everything that he feels, it's okay to feel, and that I was very glad that he felt safe enough to reach out to his friend. And I shared that I had big emotions like that when I was a kid, and that, the difference between he and I is that I didn't have the resources, I didn't have um, the option of expressing myself to um, in that way. I didn't come up in a time where that was acceptable, and shared with him that, the difference is it is acceptable. It is always acceptable to me, and whatever other resources you need to be able to talk to someone when you're having those kind of big feelings, I'm here, and we'll get those resources for you. So he got that communication. We cuddled up, we laid down together, cuddled him up before bedtime. And he said, that night that he felt better. And his lesson, his learning from it is what he got from it was that um, he had mixed up his behavior with and made it mean something about himself. Like, he got that all on his own. I did not impose that lesson. He said, I think I just mixed up that because I did this, that I'm not a good kid. And what I was able to give to him was, how many kids your age do these types of things? Like, this is just stuff that happens when we're kids and even when we're adults. So why in the world did I share that whole story with you? It's because the whole nature of what happened couldn't have happened if I hadn't provided the space of emotions are normal. Emotions are things that we experience every day. Um, there are We experience life, and our brain makes meaning, and then we experience these emotions. Um, and we need to have a safe space to be able to express those things, right? And particularly in kids, also in adults as well, but particularly in children. I think that as an ex-gen person who grew up with a baby boomer mom, where the struggle was different for them, and growing up, the experience of life was different for me. um, we can have a tendency to look at our kids, especially when we're providing them a life of abundance, or even of sufficiency, right? And say, "What do you have to worry about?" And or say, "These emotions are not valid." Like, we don't even have to say the emotions are not valid. We can indicate that in our nonverbal communication, right? This is I talked about in my earlier lives about that everything is communication. Words are only 7% of that. So we could be communicating non-verbally to our children that their emotions are not valid, that their feelings are not valid, that their thoughts are not valid. And so um, the it's important that we begin to understand that our kids are dealing with things that we didn't have to deal with, like the shooting of schools, in schools, the social media and the pressures and the cyberbullying that happens inside of social media and the social space, the technological social space, the gaming and the grooming that happens inside of that we don't even realize is happening inside of these online gaming communities or social communities. So these are the things that we didn't necessarily have to deal with as X-Gen, growing up as and even some like older millennials, right? As the millennials were kind of growing up, they didn't have to deal with that as much of that, but our children are. And so To invalidate their experience is to invalidate their emotions about the experience. And when when people, I'm going to say people, but I started out this conversation with children, but I'm going to say when people feel like their experience or their emotions don't count or don't matter, when they have no place to go, then sometimes they take rash actions. And I think that's, we have to begin to provide, we have to provide that outlet for them, and step into their model of the world. And I talk about this a lot in my trainings, primarily the trainings that I do around conscious communication. There's a portion of it where I talk about respecting one's model of the world. Well, one of the things that I think when we're talking a parent to child, there's a dynamic, there's a conversation, there's an inherited conversation about what should be the dynamic between parent and child from that standpoint. And where we can get into trouble is when we don't put ourselves in our kids' model of the world, in their shoes, in their eyes, seeing what they see, hearing what they hear, and feeling the feelings they could be feeling given what's going on in the world today, right? We only see it from our perspective and our view of how it was used to be for us, and how it is for them now seems like it's not so bad. But then when you start to imagine a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8-year old and what their experience of the world is, and what their experience of you is, telling them that their experience of the world is not valid. And I'm not saying that everyone is doing that, but I'm saying that's happening, right? Then we can see why anxiety rates, why depression rates, why suicide rates in young people go up, because they don't have an outlet or a safe space to be able to say their experience, to be able to say how they're really feeling. And when kids have the safe space to be able to say how their experience, we can then teach them how to navigate those emotions, teach them how to navigate the thoughts that come with those emotions. And we can mold and modify help them to emotionally regulate and behaviorally regulate when these emotions come up. So if we don't, like if a child or a teenager is expressing anger in a way that is harmful to you or to someone else, then we can begin to, now ideally this happens earlier in life, but I mean, wherever you start is wherever you start, right? Even as an adult, when we begin to learn emotional regulation, that's part of this emotional intelligence. But the first step in that is normalizing and naming, normalizing the emotion, like, oh yeah, it would be normal to feel that in this circumstance. Getting to the root of the emotion, like what has you feel that way? What is it that you're experiencing that contributes to see if whether what they're experiencing is just one version, like what are, one version of the story that they're making up in their mind about themselves or the situation, right? And that's not to say you go to a person and say, oh, you just made that up, but to like really look at what is the root of the emotion. Could it there be a different point of view? And when we start to do this with our kids, we enhance not only their ability to reframe situations so that it reframes their emotion, expands their capacity to critically think about what's happening inside of them or to notice what's happening inside of them. And when we are the safe spaces of acknowledgement of their emotion and validation of their experience, even if what they're experiencing is due to something that they decided in their mind or made up and is only part of the story. When we initially validate, like, oh, I could see it, how it might occur that way, or oh my, that doesn't feel good, right? My son told me he was playing dodgeball, and no, it's a dodgeball. He's playing some game where he throws a ball into a square on a wall, and it's the ball kept coming back and hitting him in the head. And I just said, like, to be honest, the way he was telling the story sounded actually very funny, but I kept my straight face and I said, "Man, that must have been really frustrating." And he was like, "Yeah, it was like the ball was trying to punish me for actually getting it in the square, and I had to miss on purpose in order to not get hit in the head." And after a moment of him telling the story, and by the way, and I can't remember where I read this, but it was in a book that talks about trauma in children. And I think this applies with adults as well, is that storytelling is very therapeutic. And the telling of a story of something that happened that felt scary or traumatic, helps to process it in the body, helps the nervous system to process it. And so the even for grown-ups right now, I'm talking a lot about children and I'm relating to this story with my son, but even in grown-ups, uh, there I find that it's therapeutic in my clients and even in myself, and when I experience something um, that is emotionally intense or even traumatic, to tell the story is very therapeutic to my body, helps my body process. And they say in kids, the more you allow them to tell the story, the it allows them to process it. So I allow a lot of storytelling for my son, even if it's the same story over and over until he gets tired of telling it, because then he's processed it. So I say all that to say, when we begin to when our kids see us as safe spaces, they see us as and not just us as parents, but like grown-ups. I talk about this in schools. I asked him in school, you know, if he's feeling this way again in school, who is there a grown-up that he feels safe to tell or talk to, right? And he says his teacher, which I'm grateful for, right? And then are there any school counselors that he might be able to talk to if he needed to felt like he wanted to talk to someone else? And these are the resources now that I'm going to be looking out for, right? We have to listen to our kids. We have to listen to our children, whether they're our biological children, our nieces, our nephews, our students, our friends, our colleagues, whatever they are, right? We need to listen to our kids because um, when we're not listening when we're only listening with our ears, we're not listening with our eyes. And I talked about that earlier this month, I believe, and a little bit later last month, the ways that we expand our listening. When we're not expanded in our listening, we can miss things. We can miss very, very critical signs. And so um, I want to share a little story about how this um, applies in the grown-up world, because I was thinking about yes, this applies, and I love sharing these things as a parent. Like this is a very personal thing for me today, 8 years old. It's a very personal thing for me today, and then I it's part of my focus and mission in my business and my organization to empower children with this work as well. And so it's no accident that I'm experiencing it personally. This is how I feel. And then the work that I do on trauma, to be able to recognize these things in the way that I do. But this work works in the grown-up world as well. So several years ago, many years ago in my former life, when I was still practicing clinically, and when I was still practicing traditionally, meaning in a traditional practice, I worked with one of the bigger healthcare organizations, and I worked as a contractor, which means that I filled in for other doctors. And I would often see patients who were put on my schedule because another doctor who was overloaded had gotten very behind. And so one day, this guy came in the room. He was a male, and I was a male patient that I was seeing. Um, Middle-aged guy and bigger guy, hefty guy, and he came in and he was extremely upset. And I walk in the room and he was like sitting there and he puffed out, And as soon as I sat down, he started grumbling at me about how I've been waiting for 2 hours, and I am so angry, and this organization, and every time I come here, and he was just coming at me, right? And you're not even my doctor, and I never get to see my doctor, and I see a different doctor every single time. And he was like, just like growling, right? And so I sat there, and I remember once in medical school, that one of our professors told us that when we were learning about taking history, that the value of listening. And I think I shared this maybe in a previous live stream, that sometimes you can actually listen a problem away. And so I sat there and I listened and I let him talk. And I probably, it's a 15-minute visit, 20-minute visit. I probably let him talk for about what seemed like about 5 minutes. It may have been a little bit less time. And then eventually he stopped talking. And I said, wow, I know that is so frustrating. Like, that would make me angry too. Right? That's all I said. It was a validation of his experience. It was a stepping into his world. It was an acknowledgement of that, he felt the way he felt. Like, wasn't like wasn't like I'm going to defend myself. It wasn't a yeah, but it was just, you know what? That that would frustrate me too. That would make me angry too. And after that, I saw the exhale, right? And instantly I became, for him in that moment, a safer space to be with. So the rest of the conversation went super smooth. I was able to get everything he needed done in that visit. And by the end of the visit, we were laughing. We were laughing and joking, and he was completely different posture and energetic space. And at the end of the visit, he thanked me and he said to me, I just want to thank you for listening to me and for hearing what I had to say. And I said, but of course, that's what I do. And so I share that with you to share that validating emotion, normalizing emotion, um, acknowledging emotion, that really is a staple of emotional intelligence. And naming the emotion gives people space. And it does further validate their experience. And when people just want to be heard and acknowledged and appreciated. And when you can give that to a person, then they're going to open up and they'll be ready and willing to hear you as well, for the most part, right? And so we can do this with our children, and we can do this with our the adults in our lives as well. Um, and there are definitely expanded other components of emotional intelligence. This is just one, right? The first is that emotional awareness, and that's like even just being aware in our own bodies of the emotion, but like the awareness of emotion, of a particular emotion in others. Literacy, which is the naming part, right? And then there's emotional honesty, and that's the courage to be able to share the emotions, right? Because I came up in an era where it wasn't cool to share your emotions, not in my household, not outside of my household. And I'm of a culture where traditionally it's not cool to share your emotions, not in the household, not out of the household. And if we want to like break those inherited conversations and break those cycles, those unresourceful cycles, and create a more emotionally intelligent future generation, then we got to start it with ourselves. We have to start with ourselves. So, and it does take courage. It takes courage for children. We have to remember that. It takes courage for adults as well, because of the nature of how we're raised, especially us people who are ex-gens and older, I should say. So circling back to this space of my son, the emotional um, awareness, like he was aware of his own sadness, the emotional literacy, he was able to name the emotion that he was experiencing, the emotional honesty. He told a friend, and then he had the courage to tell a friend and to tell me, his mom, right? And then my job is to, really elicit like what's the root cause and to support him. And that's like this part of my own emotional development and intelligence and expanded awareness, right? For my own awareness of what he's saying in my listening, my acknowledgement and naming the emotional honesty that I could share about how when I was a child, like he's not alone. When I was a child, I experienced the similar and same emotions, and what's different and what's the same, and how he's supported. And so this is one of the reasons why I feel that this kind of work should be in our educational systems. This kind of work should be taught to teachers and administrators, because this is legacy work. This is the work, this is how we break the cycles. This is how we change the narrative for our children. I could go on, but I think you get the message. I think you get the message. So if you want to know a little bit more about the work I do, you know what to do. If you're on LinkedIn with me, you can reach out to me directly through any of my through any of my channels. You can message me directly. If you're here on IG, thank you for joining me live. If you're listening on the back end, thank you for listening on the back end. Share it with someone who you think this would be useful for, impactful for, or someone who could potentially use the training in their organization. If you are on Facebook with me, I'm streaming on multiple platforms. So if you're on any of the platforms, you can either reach out to me directly through messaging, or you can go to the website. If you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, go to the website you see on your screen, and that will also lead you to be able to reach out to me as well. So for that, I think with that, is there anything other announcements that I have to make? Nope. I think that's it. Oh, I do have a training coming up November 1st through 7th. So if you want to learn NLP, if you want to learn hypnosis, if you want to learn timeline therapy, if you're trying to be a coach or you want to expand your coaching capacities and include more trauma-informed processes, you want to jump into one of the trainings. So we have a training coming up in November. We have a training coming up at the end of January and at the end of April. So those are my announcements. And if you want to explore that, then reach out to me and I'm happy to share with you and give you some information about those things. And if you're an organization and you want some workshops done, trauma-informed communication and emotional intelligence, reach out to me directly as well, or go to the website and schedule an inquiry call. All right. You all, it's Tuesday, so have a wonderful rest of the week. I look forward to hearing any comments. What are you taking away from this? Where will you go and implement this in your life, in your organization? I'm always, always, always interested to hear in the chats where you find this work valuable, where you find this work useful. So if you're coming in on the back end and you're listening, please leave me some feedback and let me know, like, what are your thoughts? Where are you implementing this? What questions do you have? Because based on your questions, I create more content. So, all right, y'all take care, and I'll see you on the next one.